Canada will soon have a new prime minister for the first time in nearly a decade. Mark Carney won a resounding vote on the first ballot, and he will replace Justin Trudeau. He's the new leader and the prime minister designate. In his victory speech, he thanked supporters and vowed to stand up for the Canadian way of life.
I pledge to you and to all Canadians that I will follow their example. I will work day and night with one purpose, which is to build a stronger Canada for everyone.
So that was the former central banker, now prime minister designate. The expectation is he will call an election in the shorter term, coming days and weeks. Let's bring you some expert analysis from Chris Hall this morning, our former national affairs editor in our CBC bureau in Ottawa, now managing principal and political strategist at Navigator, and he is in Ottawa. Welcome back, Chris. Glad to see you today.
Nice to see you, Heather. Thanks for having me on.
Because a new political era has dawned here in the country with Mark Carney's win last night. And let's just talk about that. Very nearly 86% of the vote. He won every single riding in the country. Tell us about that margin. What was the message of that massive victory?
It clearly signals that Liberals wanted change. They wanted someone who brought a different perspective and who wasn't as closely tied to the Trudeau government as Chrystia Freeland was and Karina Gould. I think even in their wildest dreams, Mark Carney's people didn't think they would get that kind of margin of victory. But obviously he resonated with Liberal voters. The big challenge for him now, Heather, is to translate that into really beginning to connect with ordinary Canadians who aren't as politically active, aren't as politically motivated, but who are aware of the kind of existential threat that now the country now faces with Donald Trump and the tariffs that the United States are proposing.
You mentioned in his wildest dreams, perhaps not imagining 86%. In her wildest dreams, perhaps Chrystia Freeland might not have expected 8%. And I'm just wondering, 8% overall, repudiation really in many ways. What is her future, Chris?
It's a great question because I do know that she has said she will run again. She repeated that again yesterday. But I think she also will want to have a role, a meaningful role with Mark Carney. But with 8% of the vote, she doesn't have a ton of leverage to work with. So finding her a position, finding Karina Gould, who represents the more progressive wing of the party and the younger voters, I think will be a big challenge for him to find them the right roles to make sure that party continues to be as united as it seemed last night with that overwhelming victory that he had.
So we're not sure what role she might have in cabinet, but that's one of the things that we're watching for Mark Carney's cabinet picks. And the suggestion is that he's going to reduce the size of cabinet to about 20 and then establish essentially a wartime cabinet, maybe even with non-elected members sitting in his cabinet. What do you think of that idea? And if so, if you like it as a possibility, who might we see at that cabinet table?
Oh, it's a communications point of view is where I do my work now. I think the message that Mark Carney will want to send is that he is ready and focused on the most important issue that this country faces. And as I said, it's Donald Trump, it's tariffs, it's making sure that we have a sound economy going forward. I'm hearing, for example, he might pick up David Lametti, former Justice Minister, as his chief of staff for this interim period. And as for your message or your question around who might be in the cabinet, how big it might be, I think he'll want to keep people in the same roles who are dealing with that U.S. file. David McGuinty in public safety, Dominic LeBlanc as finance minister, Mélanie Joly in foreign affairs to ensure there is continuity, ensure that the people who they have been dealing with in the United States don't have to deal with somebody new. As far as outside names, your guess is as good as mine. He has so much to do in the next week or so. He has to meet with Trudeau, have the formal transition to a prime ministership, pick people in his office, suggesting, again, David Lametti might lead that role, and then prepare to go to the polls. This is a big job for anybody, let alone somebody who doesn't have a ton of political experience. So we'll have to see how it unfolds, but the time is really tight, and I expect him to move quickly, meeting caucus later today, and then moving forward with who he might want in his cabinet, what it would look like.
And as far as the timing of the next election, the wisdom of calling a snap election in the middle of this trade war. What are the pros and cons of going sooner or later, Chris?
The pros of going sooner is that he doesn't give the Conservatives the opportunity to continue to compare him to Justin Trudeau as a somewhat similar newer face with the same old policies. It blunts the ability of the Conservatives to use their war chest because in the pre-writ period, there are no election spending limits to spend on advertisements. We've already seen some of them. Expect those to continue. I think if he comes back to Parliament on March 24th, he will still be defeated, or his party will be defeated, because that's what the Conservatives said they want to do. And I don't think Mark Carney and his strategists want to give Pierre Poilievre the kind of platform that he gets as the opposition leader when Mark Carney himself wouldn't have a seat in the House of Commons. So this will be a great contrast between two different types of political people. A guy who's got extensive experience inside the bureaucracy and on the world stage. Another one who has cut his teeth as a political aide and now a political MP and leader for his entire adult life. Pierre Poilievre is a formidable opponent on the hustings, and that's who we have to figure now Mark Carney needs to begin to focus on, not just Donald Trump, but who he has to face across the aisle and across the stump when they're on the election campaign.
Okay. Can I ask you one more thing? I've been just mulling this over this morning. On Wednesday of this week, we're going to get the latest Bank of Canada interest rate decision. So you'll have the current Bank of Canada governor who's watching what's going on with the trade war and responding to it with his policy. So there's Tiff Macklem. And now we have Mark Carney, the former Bank of Canada governor, responding to that very same threat, but in a different way now from a political standpoint. How do you see the two of them working together, Chris, going forward? And does that put Canada in a stronger position, or it's got to be an unusual situation anyway?
It is a little different, isn't it? Mark Carney will know better than to comment on monetary policy, which is the Bank of Canada's complete purview here. We know Pierre Poilievre has wanted to talk about revamping the mandate of the Bank of Canada. But look, it's an unusual circumstance. The fact that Mark Carney has so much experience inside the Bank of Canada in the finance department, I think that will help. They too will have a good working relationship. We know that may not be the case with Pierre Poilievre, who at one point talked about firing Tiff Macklem as the Bank of Canada governor. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to watch what they decide to do. Most people expecting there'll be another interest rate cut. There are lots of economic challenges ahead, and I think what the most important thing I heard out of Mark Carney yesterday is that the tariffs, the counter-tariffs Canada has put in place will continue until we get the respect of the United States. And secondly, that he needs to have a united front. That includes not just with premiers, but with people like the Bank of Canada governor and perhaps his own caucus, who I'm sure are looking at this thing saying, well, okay, we've got a fresh start potentially here. The polls are in our favor. We can't lose this momentum. We have to have a coherent message going forward.
Chris, thank you. First of many conversations on this, I'm sure. I really appreciate the time and analysis this morning. Chris Hall in Ottawa.
Thanks, Heather.
Thanks.